Hi, I'm Marc Lynch, Director of the Project on Middle East Political Science and the Institute for Middle East Studies at George Washington University. Welcome back to our series of POMEPS conversations with leading scholars in the field. With us today we have Jenny White from Boston University, author of many books on Islamists in Turkey and most recently Muslim Nationalism and the New Turks. Fascinating new book. And I think that's what we will talk about today. Welcome, Jenny.
Thank you.
So why don't you just start, maybe just tell us a little bit about this book, how it came about, what you were trying to achieve, and kind of what it's about.
Well, it came about because I go to Turkey quite a bit to do research, and as an anthropologist I stay long periods, and I've been going to Turkey since 1975. So that's a pretty long period. And you know, 70s was a civil war, so there have been ups and downs. But recently, so I'd say in the last 10 years, in my trips there, research trips, visits, I've noticed an incredible increase in polarization in society, Turkish society. So much so that I actually lost some friends over, you know, very old friends of decades over what I consider to be trivialities. And you know, people just stop talking to you. And then I heard similar stories from Turks that this was also happening. And I thought, what is going on? You know, that was my impetus for this book. I always try with my various books to focus on what I think is a kind of key moment in Turkey. You know, what is going on that's really important. So in the 90s, it was the rise of the Islamist movement. In the 80s, the book I wrote based on that research was about the new economy. So this seemed to me to be something unusual. And so I went to try to figure out what was going on, because it doesn't make any sense. Turkey right now is on the ups. You know, it's a star, an international star. It's the 17th biggest economy in the world. You know, it's the place that New York Times readers chose as the place they most want to visit, Istanbul, not Turkey. And so on. So, you know, how can you explain this increasing polarization? And the polarization is described as being between secularists and Islamists. So if you go, that is how people will explain it to you, and that's kind of then, you know, repeated in the studies and media accounts. But I thought that the people who would be in those groups, these two groups, actually are very similar in a lot of ways, more ways than they're dissimilar. And so I thought that can't be an explanation. I mean, they're similar in their support for globalization, the commercialization of their lifestyles. They're also similar in some negative things, which I write about in the book. That is, whether you're secular or Kemalist or Islamist, as the groups are called, you also share you share the support for big man, you know, strong man autocracy. Whether it's Ataturk, the military, or Tayyip Erdogan, the prime minister. You also share a certain illiberalism, whether it means banning alcohol or banning the headscarf. And you also, there's a misogyny aspect that is widely shared. There are women in public life, but the numbers are very low. And on most international, in fact, on all international, by all international standards, women in Turkey have very low status. So how is that possible when everything else looks like it's so great? There's also a lot of intolerance. Turkey has more journalists in jail right now than any other country in the world. So at the same time, you have, you know, globalization, liberalization, democracy. So clearly democracy doesn't necessarily go along with liberalism and tolerance. There has to be something else going on in between. So anyway, I was looking into all of these different issues and trying to explain them.
So when you say that you saw polarization was on the rise, what are the manifestations? What was it that made you think that there was this polarization? Social tensions, political tensions, interpersonal relations? And what do you mean by polarization?
Well, actually all of the above. So there is an undercurrent of kind of potential violence in Turkish society, which tends to be rather militaristic, at least the masculine aspect of nationalism is very militaristic. And there were all kinds of reports, which are not new, but they still continue despite all of these other good things going on. In one case, it was the Roma community of a town in Turkey that was attacked by their neighbors and their houses set on fire, and they were forced out of town. Another case, this man answered his cell phone in Kurdish, and the people standing around tried to lynch him.
Now, is this the sort of thing which hadn't been happening 10 years earlier?
Well, yes, that would have been happening, but now it's become personal, right? So now these things go on, but they've come into the living rooms to an extent that they drive out other forms of loyalties that have been very important in Turkish society in the past, friendship, family, so that they're dividing families. There are quite a few people I know who no longer allow any politics to be discussed at the dinner table because they've lost friends. Families broken up because one person said something positive about the headscarf. So you used to argue about those. These used to be points of tension, but something perhaps intangible seems to have changed from my point of view. And then when you ask people, they also report similar things. People are very interested in leaving Turkey, especially secularists, Kemalists, and so on. There's just, there's a feeling in the air, which I can't quantify, but that something is going on.
Now, across the Arab world for the last 2 years, especially since the Arab uprisings, we've seen this kind of polarization in Egypt, in Tunisia, and in a lot of the Arab world. What is similar, what is different about the kind of polarization that you are observing in Turkey?
Mm-hmm. Well, perhaps the difference is that the polarization in a place like Egypt is based on political events on the ground happening right now. The polarization in Turkey has roots in the way people imagine the nation, and that has roots in history. Like, which history of the nation are you going to be referring to in your imagining of yourself as a nation? And one of the things that has changed in Turkey is so even though it might seem that the reaction to Kurdish, someone speaking Kurdish, is a sort of immediate reaction, there's a long history to that may not be the case in the kind of upheavals that are going on right now, which have to do with immediate interests. What kind of system are you going to put in place, and so on. Turkey has a system in place that's been functioning for quite a long time now, more than half a century of elections and democratic elections.
Now, okay, so Muslim nationalism and the new Turks. What is the Muslim nationalism? Who are the new Turks?
Well, the new Turks, I would argue, are the Muslim bourgeoisie that grew up after the economy was opened in the 1980s. So in the 1980s, Turkey used to have this very closed, no export, or very little export-import, kind of a Eastern European Cold War economy where you couldn't get anything except locally produced products. And then suddenly in the 80s, the doors were thrown open. And the beneficiaries were these small companies, often run by pious people in the countryside, who had this great entrepreneurial pent-up energy that then was just released. And they became very wealthy. The press called them the Anatolian Tigers. And so this is a major part of the population that suddenly was able to amass money, to get into politics, to support the political party of their choice, which reflected their piety. And so when...
And this is the AK's base.
The AK's base, yeah. The AKP now has not only these people as a base, but it's the only game in town. So, all kinds of people are now supporting the AKP because there's really no one else credible to support. But the new Turks are so one of the things that has happened is that they have reformulated the history of Turkey. So Turkey is no longer a nation that was founded in 1923, coals pulled from the fire of World War I, but rather 1453, the conquest of Constantinople by the Turks. It's all over, museums, plaques, monuments, reenactments, and that gives the nation a whole different complexion, right? So where are your boundaries? It doesn't really matter, right? You can open your borders to Arab countries, you can get rid of visa requirements, you can deal with old World War I enemies, Armenia, Greece, you can solve the Cyprus issue, not possible before. So this redefinition of the nation that the Muslim nationalists have come up with has given them, all kinds of leeway that the previous nationalists, the Kemalist nationalists, did not have for foreign policy and also dealing with their own minorities.
And you said earlier, or you said in the book, that it doesn't really make sense to even speak of the AK party or of Erdogan as Islamist anymore.
Yeah. To me, you have to define your terms. Obviously, people use that very loosely. Islamist means, to me, a party or a group of people who see their goal and their policy through an Islamic lens. That's how they make their decisions. The AKP is a secular party, or a right-of-center secular party run by pious Muslims. And they make this argument quite clearly. There was actually a whole theology behind this, that, why would you assume that a pious Muslim, when it's usually he, enters politics, that he would become an Islamist by default, right? You don't assume that when a Christian enters politics. So it's a personalization, a privatization of Islam as a personal characteristic that you don't leave at the door, you take with you, but, hopefully improve your ethics, which may or may not happen, but it distances you from any kind of Islamic ideology, and then you can make policy decisions on other criteria, on the basis of other criteria.
Now let's get, maybe we can wrap up with where you left off a moment ago on the ethnic minorities and the Kurdish issue, which is obviously central to this recasting of Turkish identity. In terms of the possibilities of a meaningful resolution to the ongoing problem of Kurdish citizens of Turkey, how do you see that playing out based on what you've observed in this book?
Well, one thing that the book was criticized for initially when the first draft went around was there wasn't enough about the Kurds. And part of the reason for that is that the model, this Ottoman model that is in the politicians' minds for how to deal with their minorities, didn't have a model for dealing with the Kurds. So the Ottomans had all kinds of problems dealing with the Kurds. But in terms of what's happening now, that has to do more with strategic on the ground now, strategic interests of the AKP government and the PKK, the Kurdish PKK, that they're now seem to be doing a peace deal where the PKK, which has for decades fought the Turkish military, is supposed to be putting down its arms and being reintegrated. But so many things can go wrong with that plan that even though it feels credible, it's the first time that it actually feels like it's possible. The conjuncture of events seems potentially good, but it's a very delicate process, and the nationalists may not. They may be strewing sand into the.
Yeah, but at like a deeper conceptual level, do you see Kurdish identity as compatible with this new Turkish nationalism that you see evolving?
Yes, I do. It's one of the advantages of the Muslim nationalists, which they sometimes take advantage of and other times don't, that they can deal with non-Muslim minorities, and in this case Muslim minorities, although some of them are Alevi, which is a different kind of Islam, in a kind of welcoming way, much more welcoming than under the 1923 boundary understanding of nationalism, which made out anyone who wasn't a Muslim Turk, even if they're Turkish citizens, to be potential enemies of the state, because as Christians, they're obviously going to be cat's paws of the Europeans who are using them to undermine Turkish society. The same argument was made about the Kurds. Obviously, the Kurds are being used by the CIA or by Europe, whatever, to undermine Turkey. So that was part and parcel of the old nationalism. But the new nationalism, because it doesn't have the World War I scenario as the basis for dealing with all of these populations, is free to reimagine the Kurds as an ethnic group, something that was anathema. You only had one ethnicity, and that was Muslim Turk, right? The rest are citizens, but they can't be Turks. So in this case, it's potentially possible for Kurds to go from being a nationalist group to being an incorporated ethnic group if they just play their cards right.
Well, that's really interesting. Thanks, Jenny White. New book, Muslim Nationalism and the New Turks. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It was a great pleasure.